Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 574. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about caves and beaches, palaces and Roman ruins, cathedrals, war tunnels, and a great big boat, as we talk about a Holland America cruise through the Western Mediterranean. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. This episode's going to be a little different. Most of it's going to be a solo show with me, except for the last third of it. Let's talk about cruising the Western Mediterranean. I mentioned this show was going to be about cruising the Western Mediterranean. I was on a cruise recently, a press trip with Holland America that started in Barcelona and ended in Rome. It was a 14-day trip. And I want to tell you about that. We're going to do it in two parts. The first two-thirds of this, we're going to focus on the destinations as we tend to do on Amateur Traveler, because for me, travel is still all about the destinations. But I do want to talk about the ship and the cruise experience that we had on this particular ship. There were some new things on this boat because it had come out of dry dock in May. This is the Westerdam from Holland America. We're going to do that in the last third of this episode, and I'm going to have an expert, a editor from Cruise Critic, to come on that portion and help me do that. But first, let's talk about the destination. So this cruise started in Barcelona, and we've talked about Barcelona on this particular show before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Barcelona is still one of my favorite cities in Spain, if not my favorite city in Spain. It's a place that I have some very good memories from. I've been there, I think now this was my fourth time. The one thing I will say, I was saddened that just a week after I was there, or within a couple weeks after I was there, there was the terrorist attack, and my heart goes out for the people of Barcelona. I did not spend a lot of time there on this time, but I would recommend, if you have not been to Barcelona and you do this trip or one like it, Barcelona is absolutely worth spending a couple days there, and I certainly would have if I hadn't already spent time in Barcelona. And certainly the things I would recommend seeing there is some of the Gaudi architecture like Sagrada Familia or Park Güell, and then also the Gothic section of the city are certainly the things that would be high on my list. There are things I still want to see in the region, and of course we have recently talked about going north from Barcelona up to the Costa Brava as well. Our next day was at sea, and then our first stop outside of Barcelona was in Cadiz, or Cadiz, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I'm pronouncing where I can with the Spanish pronunciation, but Cadiz is the home of sherry. As you're doing these particular trips, you can do excursions, and the most popular excursion for Cadiz, if you haven't been there already, is Sevilla or Seville. Now, I did not do that on this particular trip because I've already been to Sevilla, and so I spent the day exploring Cadiz. It was a warm day, but I was in Spain in August in the southern coast, so you would expect that, and I enjoyed the city of Cadiz. I went to the cathedral. I went over to a fort, which is along the coast, along the south. There's one of the nicer beaches in Cadiz is right next to that particular fort. And there's another old fort that juts out into the ocean that you have to take a causeway out to. And I did quite a lot of walking around the old market and the old city in Cadiz. And I did enjoy that city. But again, for most people, probably that site is going to be about getting into Sevilla, getting in and see the cathedral in Sevilla, getting in and seeing the tower of the cathedral, which used to be a minaret, which has a ramp that goes up to the top, as in fact does the cathedral tower in Cadiz as well. Both cities were enriched by all of the trade that came from the New World at the time of the Spanish explorers. The second stop was in Gibraltar, Gibraltar being British territory, very different from the Spanish ports that it was in the midst of in this particular trip. And I'd have to say that if I hadn't gotten up into the rock itself, if I just explored Gibraltar, it would have been okay. The main street of Gibraltar, or the main area of shopping, is mostly a shopping area with lots of different shops. You can shop in English, but that wouldn't have been all that special to me. But I did a tour up to the rock about 4 o'clock in the afternoon with just 11 people on a minibus, and we went up and we saw 3 different things on the rock. One was the Cave of St. Michael's, which is one of the many limestone caves in Gibraltar, which was very cool, although I could have done without all the colorful lights that they were displaying it. It made it very hard to take pictures in there, but they do concerts inside this cave, very interesting. Then we went down and we saw the Barbary macaques, or the apes of Gibraltar. They're not really apes, they are monkeys, but we spent a little time watching them as they were feeding. And I know for some people that was the highlight of the entire cruise, was seeing the Barbary macaques. Quite fun. I have some pictures of little tiny baby macaques and some close-ups. We did not see them try and steal the woman's purse that one of the other people on the tour did. It's definitely some place to keep hold of your belongings, and don't bring food with you because they are adept at opening purses and backpacks and such. And then the third stop we had was we did a tour to the war tunnels. Basically, at one time, Spain and France were besieging Gibraltar, and so they built a series of tunnels. This was the first set of tunnels they built inside of the rock to place about 7 cannons to be able to fire out on these besiegers. And it was interesting seeing those tunnels and hearing that history. Now, of course, in World War II, or just before World War II, they continued to dig many, many tunnels, and I'd love to do the World War II tour of the rock and the different tunnels that were built at that time. There are about 30 kilometers of tunnels, including some that are just used for traffic, that go through this particular rock. Oh, apparently the old Roman word for Gibraltar means the rock with holes in it, which is interesting because, of course, here in the United States, we talk about solid as a rock. The solid as the rock of Gibraltar being the slogan for one particular insurance company. Well, that's not all that solid. We also went down to the southernmost point where there's a lighthouse, and there's also a mosque that was built there, as some of the people who come in to work in Gibraltar came in from North Africa and then came around the backside. Again, that was really the highlight for me, was that particular tour. So if you do get to Gibraltar, certainly get up to the Rock of Gibraltar. The next stop was in Malaga, Spain. There is a fortress that I would love to have gotten to, although I would have had problems. The elevator that went up there actually broke the particular day that we were there. I went out on a 4x4 tour into the Andalusian countryside. That was okay. It wasn't my favorite tour of the whole cruise. That was an excursion that was booked through the ship. And I think I would have enjoyed it more if it was just our particular 4x4, but we were traveling in caravan with a larger number of people, and that meant that when we stopped someplace, there was a crowd of us walking around and things like that. And also, I hadn't anticipated how much It wasn't a remarkable landscape for me because where I live in Northern California reminds me so much of that region that other people were enjoying the landscape more than I was. I think next time my plan B, which was a kayak tour, probably would be my first choice. And I should say in Malaga, the number one place that people did go, what they really are pitching it for is a chance to get up to Granada and going up and seeing the Alhambra in Granada. And I would certainly recommend doing that. It's a longer tour. It's going to take you longer to see. But the Alhambra in Granada is a beautiful spot and absolutely worth doing. Although, if you're going to do that particular excursion, you need to book ahead of time because they have a limited number of tickets to the Alhambra. So even if you were to go on your own, you probably couldn't get in unless you had booked months in advance. So if you're going to go on this cruise, for instance, or something else through Malaga, then book in advance, book well in advance if you want to go to the Alhambra in Granada, which is this palace that was one of the last places where the Moors were in charge in Spain and then was refurnished and repurposed by Ferdinand and Isabella. Beautiful, beautiful palace. Recommend going and seeing it, but book ahead. In Alicante, Spain, the number one spot to visit are a set of palm groves, which are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And far be it from me to turn down a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but I chose not to go to there and instead to a mountain town called Guadalest. And I highly recommend going there instead. So this is one of the last towns that fell in the reconquest of Spain from the Moors. And the reason for that is it's a very protected walled town up on a rock, behind a rock where you have to walk through a rock to get there. And so it's a little tiny town, but was easy to defend. It is certainly overrun with tourists. They get a lot of tourists, a lot of bus tourists as we were, but it is still worth seeing. It is a beautiful village with spectacular views of this village. I recommend doing the hike up to the old fortress at the top of the rock that you walk through and under to get into the city, which has beautiful views of this valley where Guadalest finds itself. But my pictures from there, I would say, are some of my favorite from the entire cruise. So Guadalest as an excursion from Alicante in Spain. That did mean that both in Malaga and Alicante, I didn't get a chance to see the city itself. You have to make your choice with what you're going to do in terms of excursions because you only have so much time in port. Our next stop was in Palma de Mallorca on the island of Mallorca in Spanish territory in the Mediterranean. And Palma de Mallorca is a beautiful city. It's got a beautiful cathedral, although this is one that I didn't get into to see the interior because I made the mistake as I was wearing shorts. It was a hot day, and this was one where they do enforce the dress code. I have a new article out about what to pack for Spain, and one of the things to remember is that certain cathedrals in Spain, in Europe in general, will enforce dress codes, and those certainly include no bare shoulders and can often include no shorts. And so this might be a time to have your travel pants where the legs zip off so that you can zip them back on again when you need to get into something like a cathedral. But I did not wear mine that day. But Palma de Mallorca is a beautiful city, did enjoy walking around it some, but I did an excursion which I quite enjoyed. I went out to the Caves of Drac. That's D-R-A-C-H. It's across the island, and it is a very popular place. They certainly let in a lot of tourists here, and one of the interesting things about this that is unusual is they let all the tourists in at one time. Rather than drip the tourists in over the course of an hour, they basically put in one group and then they wait 40 minutes and put in the next. And the reason for that is that after you walk down in this big scrum through the beautiful cave, you end up at this very large underground lake, which they have turned into an amphitheater. And you are going to listen to a little tiny concert here. And honestly, I thought it would be hokey. I really wasn't looking forward to that part as well, but I did enjoy it. They just had some musicians come out on a rowboat and row around this lake and play some music in this darkened cave. Not a lot of fancy lights, no loudspeakers. Now, if there hadn't been so many tourists there trying to take pictures with their cell phones, I probably would have enjoyed it more if people had just behaved, because your flash is not going to work when it's that far away as we were. And then you can, at the end of the concert, get on a boat yourself, although most people are not going to be able to if you're coming as I was in August when there are so many crowds. This is a place that I did enjoy, although I would enjoy going there off-season. And I think that's true for this entire cruise. I enjoyed it in August, but I think I would enjoy it more in September when the crowds are smaller and then also the weather's a little cooler. It was warm while we were there. It was quite hot, in some places record heat. In fact, the week before we were in Rome, it got up to 112 degrees Fahrenheit, which is in the high 40s, I believe, in Celsius. And so they had quite a lot of heat. It would be nicer in September. The one thing about doing it, though, in August is there were more people of different ages on the boat. So if you were bringing kids, for instance, you'd have to go when school is out. Now I might go for June instead. But that was Palma de Mallorca, and then we had a day at sea, and we were done with Spain at that point. Our next stop was in Toulon, France. And again, Toulon, I did not explore the city itself, but I took an excursion off to Aix-en-Provence. Aix-en-Provence was someplace that I've been wanting to go. There's a number of different cities in that area. I would have loved to get to Aix-en-Provence and Arles, and I'd love to get to Carcassonne someday. So at some point, I'm going to be heading back to this region of France. This was, as a cruise tends to be, just a taste. You can only do so much in a different cruise ship, but one of the things that I do like about cruise travel is how many different tastes of how many different places you can see. And of course, it gives you an idea where you want to go back to. And this is a place I would go back. I would take my wife back to Aix-en-Provence. It's a beautiful city, just beautiful light down here in Provence. And when we talk about, when we did a show, for instance, on Provence, the beautiful light that attracted the painters, the golden stone that the city is made of, the markets selling fruit, even when the city is filled with tourists, as it was when I was there, Aix-en-Provence is a beautiful city, and definitely something I was glad that I had done that. The next day was supposed to be Calvi in Corsica, which is at the northern end of the island, but this is a cruise, and as with all things cruise related, you are limited in terms of weather, and it turns out that it did not work out for us to go to Calvi because it was not protected from some of the winds that were blowing. We had one relatively rough day at sea that got a few people seasick, and they changed the itinerary so that instead of going to Calvi, we went to Ajaccio, which is a more sheltered port on the west southern coast of Corsica. A beautiful city. I mostly just spent some time walking around the city at this point on my own, just kind of exploring it. Didn't do any excursions. Some days you just need to take a day off when you're on a long cruise like this. We started on August 3rd and ended on August 15th, and then I stayed for a couple more days. So Ajaccio was one of those days that I took it a little more easy. Now, one of the reasons we didn't get into Calvi is that was one of two ports on this particular itinerary where we were supposed to take a tender. And the tender means you get to and from the ship via small boat. And therefore, you're going to have more problems if you have weather, as we did. And so if they had been able to find a dock, as we were in Ajaccio, they may have gone into Calvi just fine. But with having to go in on the smaller boats, that limits what they could do. The other port happened to be the next day on the schedule, and that was Monte Carlo, where we went in by tender. And Monte Carlo is a place that I have explored before. I've been to the south of France before. We stayed in Nice, and then it came over on the train to Monte Carlo. So I spent some day walking around Monte Carlo and Monaco, but I chose instead to do an excursion that went off to Aix, Easy, and to Nice. And Aix is one of those cities which is this little tiny mountain village that is a walled village along the coast between Monaco and Nice, and it is spectacular. I thought it was just a very beautiful place. If you do go, I would recommend paying, I think it was €6 to go all the way up to the top where there's a botanical gardens. And for one thing, the narrow streets can be filled with people from your bus tour as well as other people's bus tours, but not everybody is willing to pay a little more, so you get a little more elbow room by the time you get to the top, and then you get these stunning views of the rugged coastline here in this corner of France, right near the Italian border. as is a beautiful city, I wouldn't want to live there because everything has to be carried in by hand. There are no roads that go up other than walking roads. And so it would be a little bit of an inconvenient place to live, but a wonderful place to stay, even if you weren't there on a cruise ship, or maybe especially if you were there off season and not on a cruise ship. But beautiful little city. And then Nice is a city that I really enjoy. So it was fun to get back to that city. Don't enjoy the beach. It doesn't have much of a beach. It has more stones than even pebbles on the beach there. But you'll see a lot of people out on the beach anyway. But it is a beautiful old town area there. A very touristy place, but I enjoyed Nice. And in part, I enjoyed it, as we talked about in the show a long time ago, because we rented an apartment there. And so that's a place that even just for a couple nights became a temporary home. And so I still have a fondness for the city of Nice, which is why, even though I had been there before, I chose to go back on the particular excursion that I did on this cruise. The next stop was our first of 2 stops in Italy, and that was Livorno. And Livorno is really a place that they are selling you, not Livorno itself, which was heavily damaged with bombing because it was a major port in Italy in World War II. But what they're really selling you is that this is the gateway into Tuscany. My original plan was to go to Florence and Pisa, and then I went to one of the port talks where they were talking about all the different things there are to do at different ports and what excursions you should take. And they started talking about the town of Lucca, which is a walled town, rather large for a walled city, also in Tuscany. And I had not been to Lucca, but I had been to Florence. And so I changed my plans from Florence and Pisa to Lucca and Pisa. Also thought about going to the city of San Gimignano, which is where some people went, which is the city of so many towers, which I still have not been to, and it is on my list. And then, of course, some people went down to Pisa and then also to Siena. And Siena is one of my favorite cities, but I decided to do something I had not seen instead. Now, most of those cities are going to be a decent bus ride away from Livorno. And so you're doing longer excursions on those days. But again, a nice taste. I enjoyed Lucca. We were there not as long as I would have liked, and that's one of the disadvantages with the going on an excursion and back in time for lunch sort of approach that you often get on a cruise ship. And so we were back by, I want to say, 1 or 2 o'clock or something like that. I could have used more time in Lucca to walk around. I walked some on the walls and walked some with the group and some away from the group exploring the city. Enjoyed that. Pisa was packed. Pisa was just full of tourists, and probably as much as any other place we went to except for Rome. And the interesting thing for me is when you see pictures of Pisa, you see the baptistry and you see the tower, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And so, of course, you were going to see that. We didn't have time to climb it. That would be interesting. But what stood out for me wasn't those two, but the cathedral in between them. No one had told me how beautiful, how large, how gorgeous that particular cathedral is. So I enjoyed seeing the Leaning Tower, but it affected me less and certainly surprised me less than seeing the cathedral there in Pisa. So if you do get to Pisa, please take the time to go into the baptistry, but also then into the cathedral, because I think it's worth a look. They're doing some renovation when I was there, so you could only see part of the mosaic that covers the end of the sanctuary above the altar, but you could see enough to see that it was quite beautiful. But just the art in the cathedral alone and the size of it, I just thought it was stunning. I thought it was one of the most beautiful cathedrals that I have seen. And again, so many different spots you could have gone to on an excursion, either on your own or on one of the official excursions from Livorno. Definitely that is the place that you don't want to just stay on the ship, in my opinion. Although I'm not one to just stay on the ship in general, but we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then the last stop was Civitavecchia. And Civitavecchia is the port for Rome, or the cruise port for Rome. You're still about 40 kilometers, I think, out of the city. So you're a bus ride or a train ride away from Rome itself. and we ended there. If you were continuing on, as some of the people were from our cruise, so we had someone who continued on and then went to the other side of Italy over to Venice and then down to Croatia and Greece and several places like that. If you're going to continue on and you were doing some excursions, I think the excursion that I would have loved to do that I didn't find a way to do on this particular trip was to some of the Etruscan tombs between Rome and Civitavecchia. I have not seen them yet. And there's so little that we know about the Etruscans, and what we know about them is predominantly from their tombs. So I would definitely be interested in seeing some of those. Did not get to them this time. Now, I did have 2 days to do some exploring in Rome, and if you're ending your cruise in Rome and you have not spent time in the city, absolutely something I would recommend. We've done whole shows. I think we've done 2 different episodes over time on Rome. Let me just tell you the 2 things that I did this time. Certainly in Rome, if you're a history buff like I am, getting to the Roman Colosseum and the Roman Forum is something I would highly recommend. I got there in a different way this time. I went on a VIP tour. I went on a tour with Live Italy, who has sponsored this show, I believe, before. And I believe Live Italy has been a sponsor of this show in the past. And I know I also work with them with Blogger Bridge. But I did a VIP tour, so it's 6 people max that you put on this tour. By the time you hear this, there should be a write-up about that tour on the blog, amateurtraveler.com. A wonderful tour. One of the things that was interesting, because it was a small VIP tour, we got down underneath the Colosseum. They have opened up the tunnels of the Colosseum, which were not available to get to when I was there last. And you can see things like, here's how the trapdoors would work in the floor, and an elevator that would have brought up the wild animals that would have come out from nowhere and surprised the crowd. So we did that. The Colosseum went up to the 4th level, which you can't do again without a VIP tour, and then up to the Palatine Hill and the Forum, and a fantastic day. And also, your tour guide can tell you where to find the best gelato is one of the things that I learned. And then the next day, I went out to the old port of Rome, and that is Ostia Antica. And I did that as a tour with Context Travel. Their specialty is for the intellectually curious, and so they tend to do real in-depth tours. My Live Italy tour was, but they don't always do it the same way. Depends on who's on their tour. But Context is definitely a deep dive into the Roman history and the Roman culture. Ostia Antica is a surprisingly well-preserved Roman ruins there. And you get the idea of what Rome actually looked like, too, because in Ostia Antica, you'll see the old apartment buildings where most of the people in Rome also would have lived. So wonderful tour. I'll be writing more about that on the blog as well. So that's kind of what I did and why I went on this particular cruise. For me, a cruise is not just about the boat. A cruise is about, where does this boat go? You offer me a cruise, I'm going to say, well, let's see where it goes. And I was interested in some of these places. I had never been to Cadiz, Gibraltar, had briefly been to Malaga, hadn't been to Alicante, Palma de Mallorca, Toulon, Corsica in any way, shape, or form, Livorno, or Civitavecchia. Now, I'd been to Rome and I'd been to Florence, as I mentioned. So that's the itinerary, and now I'm going to bring on a special guest, and we're going to talk about the boat itself and the cruise experience. 2 apologies. One for this segment, which is going to be in a microphone I brought with me on a trip. I'm recording this little bit in Charlottetown on Prince Edward Island on vacation. And the second one for this next portion of the interview here, I'm afraid the volume between Dory and I is not balanced. We were using one microphone, which was much closer to her, but apparently my voice carries more, but I think this is worth listening to anyway. I'd like to welcome to the show for this second half, Dory Saltzman, who is a senior editor at cruisecritic.com, and Dory is in charge of the mainline ships like we're on now here. We're on the Westerdam, Holland American Westerdam, or Westerdam, depending on whether you're Dutch or not. And then also she does expedition ships, which this is not one. This is much larger than those, and we've talked about those on some other episodes. But I wanted to bring Dory on because while some of us have been off having fun doing expeditions and shore excursions and things like that, she's been going through the nooks and crannies of the ship because that's what Cruise Critic does, and really trying to look at what the ship provides and or who's a good audience for this product that Holland America is putting out. So she spent a lot more time You didn't get the facial, you got the hair
I
treatment.
got a hair treatment. Keratin hair treatment. Ladies, I recommend it highly.
Going to the spa, going up to the
Exploration Central.
and I was going to say the
Oh, I
cabanas
did
and
go
things
to
like
the
that.
cabanas, yes.
So she knows the ship much better than I do, and then has more context in terms of identifying the product because of her job. So I wanted to bring her on and talk about a Holland America ship, this particular ship in general. So this ship just got out of dry dock in May.
Yes.
And has some new features, which I know you liked. You were
Yes.
impressed by some of the new things they added. What were you impressed by, first of all?
So I am particularly impressed with two main changes they made. One is Exploration Central, which is up on deck 10 in a space that used to be called, and technically still is called, Crow's Nest. It's an observation lounge, so it's got these gorgeous floor-to-ceiling glass windows.
It's in the bow of the ship, so you can see where the ship is going on any day
Yes.
that you're going someplace.
Yep. It's a great place to sit during the day and read. It's a quiet space, comfy chairs and couches. And that's what the Crow's Nest always was, a place to go
Right.
for sightseeing, for sitting and relaxing, for doing puzzles, for playing card games.
It's also a bar,
There's also-
unsurprisingly, because pretty much every place on the ship is a bar.
There's a bar there as well.
I don't know how many
So-
bars there are on the ship, but I would say at least a dozen.
I don't know that they're actually. I was actually just thinking about it before when I was thinking about what I have to write about, and I don't think there are actually a full dozen. on the
Really?
ship.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could be mistaken.
Yeah, and we could count them later. But yeah, I think there might be 8, something
Okay.
like that. But what Holland America did with this space is they turned it into an experiential spot. So they turned it into a place where you could really learn about the destinations that you're visiting on the itinerary. So it's a combination of different things. They have their shore tours desk, which they call the EXC, or Exploration Central Tour Desk. It's where you can go find out about the tours that the cruise line offers.
Get tickets. Yeah.
But it's also a place where you can go and talk to an expert if you don't want to do the cruise line's tours. If you want
Right.
to go off independently,
Explore on your own.
and somebody and you want somebody to help you, they will do that, which is very unusual for a cruise ship. Cruise ships make money selling their
Well, it's
excursions.
usual that they'll do the shore talk and tell you, here's where the market is and here's where that is
Right.
in a big group
Correct.
capacity. And they do that here
Yes.
too, both live and then you can watch it later on your TV in your room if you missed it.
Right. But they don't normally sit down with a person who wants to go off on
Yeah,
their own and
that's
say,
more
I
different.
want to go to maybe the same place the tour is going, but I want to do it on my own.
Right.
Normally, you kind of would get the messaging from most cruise lines that, well, you want to go with us because it's hard to get there. We guarantee you'll be back on time.
And that is an advantage, that whole guarantee you'll be back on time, or maybe they would wait the ship for you
Sure.
if you booked through them, or
Absolutely.
get you to the next port if
Right.
they can't wait the ship for
That
you.
is absolutely true, especially if you're doing independent touring.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah.
completely on your own, that's completely true. But here they will sit down with you with a map,
Right.
and they will help you map out an independent tour for the day,
Right.
which is really, I just think, a wonderful thing, a wonderful service for people, especially in Europe where maybe someone's been to maybe some of the main sites and they want to try something different.
Right.
So that's one aspect of Exploration
Well,
Central.
and one of the writers who's actually on this press trip with us came with an injured leg, and she really didn't want to try and keep up with a press group, rather, or not even press group, a tour group. And so she and her son have been traveling, seeing every place on their own,
Yeah.
and doing hop-on, hop-off buses or something like that,
Yeah.
because it just didn't fit.
Right.
It just wasn't a good match for her. And whether it's that, or whether, like you or I today, you just get tired of trying how slow a tour group can go, and
Yes,
it can go.
it can
It is
go.
useful at times to know that you can do some things and to get some help
and get
doing
help.
things.
I mean, that's the key.
by
Is
yourself,
that
yeah.
you can always go off and do things by yourself.
Right, absolutely.
But to get help is, I just think it's an excellent service.
They've got some audio visuals up there which are interesting. They've got some tabletop touchscreen things where you can find out kind of 4 pieces of information about every stop, kind of the 4 highlights for every port of call. And then they've got another one where you can vote on, they'll ask a question of the day, which is just kind of fun.
Yeah, done it every morning.
I think I may have missed one day, but it's kind of fun to see where your first passport stamp was or things like that.
Yeah.
And then in the front, they have what they call a virtual bridge, which is giving you information about the technical, geeky aspects of the ship. And as a technical, geeky person, I've enjoyed that.
I don't know what any of it means, but it's cool looking.
Yes. Well, there you go. It's transparent screens that you can look through and see the view, and it's Pretty cool.
Right.
You were impressed by that?
Yes, I was impressed by that. They also have a small library in the area which has maritime history, has Dutch history, and then has more information about the ports that we're visiting. Some of it is guidebook type stuff. They also have fiction books that are about some of the ports.
Right.
And then they have very pretty picture books if you just want to look at picture books.
Right.
Again, sort of taking advantage of the fact that that the Crow's Nest has always been a very nice place to just sit and sort of look at a book in a beautiful surrounding. The other nice thing that they have is what they call a theater. It's sort of a lecture space where you can go and experts will give you lectures about things related to the ports or language lessons. So I think it was our first day, there were some basic Spanish classes.
I think that was the second day. The first day was the Legend of Don Juan.
Oh, right. Early on, there was some Spanish lessons, and then they did one about the Pillars of Hercules when we were
going to Gibraltar. Yeah.
There was one on Mediterranean spices.
One on tapas.
One on tapas, yeah. We're leaving Spain in another day or two, and I'm sure they'll be doing things related to France and Italy. And it's not just like the regular port talk where they say, here are your whatever places to go. There's stories or things to know about a culture. Again, another way of just getting to know the cultures and the geographies of the places that we're visiting. The entire space is designed to let people interact with the destinations on a slightly deeper level than you normally might. And on top of that, it's just a beautiful space. I mean, it's a beautiful space. So that's Exploration Central, and I'm very impressed with it. This is the first ship that has it. They haven't put it out on any other ships yet. They will be doing some other ships.
And when we say the date for that, this is August of 2017. If you're listening later, then it may be on other ships.
That's correct. That is true. They will always have been the first ship. Other spaces that I'm particularly impressed with are what is called the Music Walk. And that did start on another ship called Koningsdam, and they're really trying to roll it out to as many ships in the fleet as they can. The Music Walk is composed of 3 pieces. B.B. King's, which was on the ship before, but they enhanced the space. And B.B. King's is a blues and jazz, well, maybe not jazz, not really into B.B. King.
Well, B.B. King tends to be more blues, but there's a wider range for the people in that space. I think the first song I heard them sing was a soul song. They've been doing some Motown. It's a greater range of music.
Okay. And it's incredibly popular. For me, it hasn't necessarily been the place that I've gravitated to, but I mean, anytime I've passed there, it is packed, and people are dancing.
You've been busy going to the Lincoln Center.
I've been going to Lincoln Center stage. So that is one of the other pieces of Music Walk, Lincoln Center stage, and that is where they have I believe that's technically called a piano quartet. They have 3 violinists, a celloist, and a piano
Oh, I didn't
player.
realize it was a piano player. Okay.
And they're people who come from Lincoln Center, and they come for, I don't know how long, maybe a 3 or 4 month contract, and they do 3 programs a day in the evening and into the night. It ranges from pure classical music, and then
there was a Dvorak.
There was a Dvorak.
Yesterday.
There was an American composers. There was somebody else. I don't remember who the other person was. But so they'll do some specific composers. They'll also do just something that's called like classical favorites.
Right.
But then they also do a variety of different things. They do something called, I think it was like New Perspectives, and they had a song from Sting that they did. They had, I can't remember the name of the band, but the song Creep. Some people will know what I'm talking about, but it's like a rock song from 2008. So they did that. They did Dave Matthews Band. Last night I was there. They did Coldplay. They did the Peanuts, the song from the Peanuts.
Sure.
So they do a whole bunch of different things. They did one that was some Broadway musical stuff. So there was some West Side Story stuff. It's a wide range of music that they do. They're very short, maybe 20 to 25 minutes. It's a very small space. So my favorite thing is to sit in the first or second row, and I love to watch them when they're playing, watch the facial expressions and how into the music they get. So for me, it's not just about listening to the music, which is phenomenal, but also just being able to see it in a way that you wouldn't normally get to see, because they would normally be on a big stage in front of you, and they're right there in front of you. So that's Lincoln Center Stage, and yes, that's where I've been spending a lot of my time. The third piece of Music Walk is Billboard on Board. It's a dueling piano bar setup, and they do hits from the Billboard charts. Sometimes it's just regular hits, sometimes it's the hits of the 50s, sometimes the 60s.
I think our cruise director, one of her favorites was The Things You Thought were hits,
should be number,
but
yeah.
weren't.
Yeah.
Never made it to number 1.
Yep. And last night I went through and they were doing all music that was from outside the United States, but then charted in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole variety, but it's all music you've heard and you know and you can sing along to. And the two guys have great interaction with each other, and it's just another fun space. So it's 3 very different types of music, all available
Well,
pretty
and
much.
4 if we count the main stage, which is still going on with the more
Correct.
Broadway-like shows, and tonight's a comic, and
Correct.
tomorrow night is something else. I can't even think what it is
Right.
tomorrow night.
That's
A magician
another
or
part
something
of
like
Music Walk.
Yeah.
But yes, they still have that as a 4th option.
that.
So
Exactly.
the variety in a given night means there's pretty much something for almost everyone. If all you want is maybe really teen pop music, okay, fine. This probably isn't the ship for you, but there's something
Well, if
for
it's
everybody.
teen pop music, then maybe you're up with the kids.
Right, maybe you're in the
at
kids club.
the kids club dancing, but
Yes.
yeah.
So those are the 2 things that I've been the most impressed with. Another very popular venue on the ship that is new is America's Test Kitchen.
Not brand new.
So what it was before was the Culinary Council
Right.
kitchen, and now it's America's Test Kitchen. The set is entirely new.
Yes.
And the concept. They were both cooking
Right.
demonstrations, but this is a slightly different concept.
Branded with the TV show America's
Yes.
Test Kitchen. If you are not familiar with that TV show, it is on cable TV.
Yeah. And it has more to do with the science of cooking, not just here are the ingredients, here's how to do it, but also
We
why.
tried 100 different ways to do this, and this is the way we found best,
Yeah.
or this is the how, or the,
Yeah, so I went to one class and she talked, why the pasta cooks the way it cooks. So
All right.
yeah, so then I thought it was interesting. I did not know, for instance, here's a little tip that when you make pasta, you keep some of the pasta water when you drain it, just in case you might need it later if it gets too clingy, you can put some of that same pasta water in there.
Okay.
See?
I did not done
Yeah.
that. And that didn't come up during the trivia contest either,
No.
which I did
Well, if it does.
so poorly at yesterday.
So those are some of the spaces that I've been the most impressed with. There have been other changes.
Of the ones that are changed.
Right.
How about the ones that there's not first time on Holland America. Holland America does this well. I've always appreciated this, and I still appreciate it.
The food. The food is
Yeah.
really, really good, phenomenal. That hasn't changed at all, and including in the main dining room, which nowadays is
Meaning not just in the, you don't mean not just in the Lido, which is the cafeteria, but you mean not just in the specialty dining rooms,
correct,
but also
not
in the main
not
dining
just
room.
in the dining rooms that you have to pay for.
Yes.
In the free dining rooms, the food is quite good,
Yeah.
and the service is quite good.
Well, and we've talked about it, I think, or I was talking with somebody who was in the press trip. I have run into people who the cafeteria style, the Lido style, which most cruise ships in this class have, is so convenient and easy that I've run into people that it's 10 days into a 14-day cruise and they haven't been to the main dining room. And
Sure.
that is a mistake.
Oh, I think so. Unless you really are somebody who doesn't like to sit at a table in a formal setting, and there are.
Well, when you say a formal setting, cruising has changed.
yes,
We have 2 nights where we're dressing up
right,
on a 14-day cruise.
right.
And dressing up is not necessarily tuxedos. I saw a couple people wearing tuxedos,
Right.
but I was wearing a jacket and tie.
Sure. And I guess
Yeah.
what I meant by dressing up even means like you can't wear shorts.
Right.
Into the main
I will
dining
go
room.
put on long pants
Right.
before I go.
So if you really are the kind of person who really just wants to stay in your shorts and you just want to, then
I am sometimes, yes.
and then-
But even with that, put on the long pants,
Okay.
go to the main dining room because the food is good,
yes.
the presentation is good, the
Yeah.
service is good.
Yeah.
So I think that's a mistake.
yeah.
To miss that out. Now you may also want to do some of the other where you do pay for them experiences. We have done two
Two.
so far. We did one in the Pinnacle, which is wonderful. That is serving food from the Pacific Northwest is really the menu they're targeting there, is what they said.
Okay.
That is what they told us.
Okay.
In fact, we had wine from Washington
That's true.
when we were
They
there.
did. That's true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of steaks though, so I guess I just didn't associate steaks necessarily.
Well, it was surf and turf.
Okay.
It was tended to be what was there that day.
Okay.
And then we went to the
Canaletto.
restaurant Canaletto, the one that I can't remember the name of, yes. Which is a part of the Lido turns into an Italian restaurant at night.
Yes, and it's fairly casual.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the food was very good.
And then tonight we're going to a pop-up restaurant where the Pinnacle turns into something else.
Yes, it's called Rudy Seldemer, and it was created for Holland America by their chef, by their corporate chef, whose name I honestly can't remember right now,
Okay.
other than his first name is Rudy.
I was guessing that. And we're guessing his last name is not Saldemer.
No.
The
He's
Salon
Dutch.
of the Sea, whatever.
I
he is.
believe he's Dutch.
Okay.
Holland America's Dutch heritage. I believe that he is a Dutch gentleman. It is a pop-up restaurant, meaning that they take, I believe they don't take the entire space of Pinnacle Grill. They take a significant section of Pinnacle Grill
Yep.
for one night out of the cruise, and it turns into this specialty restaurant.
Again, that is an additional cost on top of your
Yes.
cruise.
Yes, that is an additional cost. And they have one other one that they do that, and I
Every
hope,
other week is this
yes,
correct?
and I hope I don't mispronounce this. A Taste of Labrage, I believe.
Okay.
Is something like it, and that's a Dutch. There is a Dutch restaurant in Amsterdam called Labrage, if
Okay.
I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is an at-sea version of that restaurant. And it is a 12-course tasting menu. I
Oh my,
believe.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Doria's unfortunately getting off the ship
Tomorrow.
so I wanted to record this before she got off the ship. And so one last tip, as the cruise critic expert on cruising for this class of ship, when you go on a cruise or when you go on a Holland America cruise, one thing that you should know that will make your cruise better.
I think that Holland America sometimes has a reputation for being very old. And this has maybe a little bit less
Old
to do
as
with
in the
age, the demographic.
The demographic,
and as
okay.
well as in the onboard experience that is offered to.
Okay.
And
not having the teen pop songs.
Well, yeah, way beyond not having the teen pop songs. And while this I don't necessarily know has to do with when you're on the ship, I think it's when you're looking at cruise lines, don't assume that there won't be anything on a Holland America ship, especially in the ships that are receiving the upgrades, because the ships now have a younger feel. There's a lot more to do. And so really
well,
give
and the
it a chance.
demographics on this cruise are much younger than the cruise that I went on with them in South America.
Yes.
In part because we're in August and we're in Europe.
Yes.
And it's also a huge cross-section of people in terms of countries. 44 countries represented
Yeah.
on the ship, which
I-
I was
I-
in the passengers.
I was discussing with the general manager actually recently about the demographics, because I was surprised at the demographics.
Yeah.
Having been on Holland America, it was just a 2-day cruise, but having been on, I was quite surprised, and he said that Holland America in Europe is a much younger crowd.
It was interesting, yeah.
But even if this ship will go back to the Caribbean, and while it might get a little bit older, the fact is that it doesn't need to, because the kind of stuff they have on the ship now can go so much younger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe you're not going to bring in 20-somethings, 25-somethings, but people 40 years and older can find plenty to enjoy on this cruise. So just sort of keep an open mind is one thing I would say.
Okay.
I did discover one hidden spot on the ship that
Okay.
I can share.
And this isn't the cabanas that we made reference
So
to earlier.
the cabanas, no, but it's very close to the cabanas.
The
So
cabanas are in a spot way up on the 11th deck of the ship,
Yes.
out in the open air, covered, that you can pay extra for. If you have to ask how much, I suspect that you are not the clientele for the
Actually
cabana.
not as expensive as
Okay.
I thought. I mean, if you're going to do it for the entire
Yeah.
cruise, yes, it is, but you can purchase by the day. And a cabana for 2 is $55 for a day.
Oh, that
on,
is less
on a
ex-
port day.
that is much
and it's
less expensive than I thought.
$85 on a sea day. So it's
Okay.
actually, now I met a couple who have purchased it for the entire 12-day cruise.
Yeah.
That prices me out, but I mean, $55 on a port day, if I know maybe I'm not going to get off the ship, I don't think that's
Well,
much of a splurge.
And Dora and I are a little different because you enjoy sometimes not getting off the
I think
ship.
that's
I'm
right.
here for the destinations.
Right.
I enjoy the sea days.
Right.
But some days when we're in port on a cruise, like
Right.
you're about to do another cruise entirely just not as a press trip, but you and your
Correct.
husband are going on a cruise. You are planning at one of those ports, you're probably going to
Not
stay
for
on the
that
ship.
one, no.
Not for that
because
one.
That's a 17-day cruise.
Okay.
And there are 5 port days.
Okay. But if you were on this cruise,
If I had done this 12-day cruise as
Yep.
a vacation, I would have definitely stayed on for at least one port. Yes.
because then it's your
It's my
own
ship.
personal private
I
ship.
get to enjoy the ship, yeah. But back to my
Yes, back to your secret
space.
spot.
So if you go up, you have to go to the 10th deck to get to the cabanas. If you go up the staircase that goes to the cabanas,
Yes.
and you get to the top, there's a door that's to the left that goes to the cabanas. There's a door to the right that goes to a sun deck. that just is a sun deck with lounges. It's not private.
Interesting.
It's not, you don't have to pay for it, but it's very quiet. There's no bar. There's no pool, so there's nobody running around. Just a place to go and sun yourself and read. So,
Good to know.
discovered that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, our guest again has been Dory Saltzman from Cruise Critic. Cruise Critic is part of TripAdvisor, for those of you who've heard me mention TripAdvisor before. Full and fair disclosure, I don't have any association with TripAdvisor now, but I did work there as an employee for a year and a half and a contractor for 3 years and still love the company. And Cruise Critic is definitely one of the resources that is worth checking out before you go on a cruise. And so, Dory, thanks for joining us.
I thank you very much for having me.
And again, apologies that those were not very well balanced. And for this particular bit of audio, there's more information about the ship in a blog post where I have a review about the ship, and I'll link to that from the show notes. But with that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more